Welcome to This Week in Local, a Localogy podcast featuring lively conversations about the local digital ecosystem, hosted by Localogy analysts Mike Boland and Charles Lachlan.
Hello everyone, welcome back to This Week in Local. I'm your host, Mike Boland, and with me our special guest host this week, Dan Hight. Hi, Dan.
Hey, Mike, how are you?
Good. So we are here at Place 2023 on the show floor. Program just wrapped, and we're here with this episode to talk about our biggest takeaways from the show. So Dan, you as the person not only who was on and off the stage, but programmed a lot of this show, what were your sort of highlights?
Well, I think it lived up to what we wanted to, which was really kind of this intersection of digital and physical worlds. Obviously, some of the big themes that I think we're going to hear throughout a lot of the sessions, and I think some of the aspects that you saw as well. AI obviously was a hot topic that a lot of was intertwined in a lot of conversations. Contextual advertising, really because of third-party cookie deprecation that we've been talking about for a long time, is actually starting to really happen. And I think everyone is saying, okay, this is not your dad's contextual advertising, but it's a new spin on it. In real life was something that was talked about on a couple different sessions, really about experiential and different types of events. The rise of digital screens in a lot of different types of environments, not just in-store and retail media, but in restaurants and veterinary clinics and doctors' offices, lots of different places. And again, this technology of a digital screen in different types of environments is just another way to reach audiences in new ways.
Yeah. So let's take those sort of one at a time. We'll save AI towards the end because a lot to unpack there. But yeah, I saw a lot of the same things around both contextual and a lot with sort of digital out of home, and those two things sort of go together. When you look at a lot of the tracking, the attribution methods, there are a lot of sort of good first-party non-contextual things happening there in ways that they're connecting those dots. But I think contextual is interesting. I forgot who said it. I think it was
Hans, probably.
Veracast, yeah, Hans.
Yeah, Hans.
He mentioned that this move to contextual is like a step forward, not a step back. Some people look at it as like this backup plan because we're so encumbered by all these new privacy restrictions. Okay, now we'll do contextual because it's privacy safe. But I think there are a lot of advantages that we often forget about where contextual advertising can perform quite well. And we've seen that before the age of runaway unchecked ad tech, contextual was, the hot thing when it was magazine advertising and a lot of just legacy media formats where whether it be vertically oriented or interest oriented, a lot of good, ways that can work. And then you get into tracking and other things. But just in terms of the targeting and the efficacy, contextual, and with a lot of advertisers with their backs against the walls of what do we do now, they're really innovating with it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think when you start thinking about the place, and kind of mentioned this, and I think even the example that Hans and I kind of riffed on stage was really about, you want to target sports enthusiasts, so that's why you target people on ESPN,
sure,
right?
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense. But you can also target those people when they're inside of a sports bar, right?
Yeah.
In terms of digital signage.
And that brings back in the out of home, or like Dick's Sporting Goods, the retail activation. So let's talk about that too, that branch of this discussion, the out of home discussion, which is retail media networks. Those have exploded in the last 5 years, and the opportunities are ones we all know, but I'll just roll through them quickly to remind ourselves. You're talking about a point of sale or an engagement point at inventory that is so close to the point of sale. I mean, it's not the last mile, it's the last inch. Plus those contextual opportunities based on the nature of the store itself. If you're in Home Depot versus a sporting goods store or whatever, there's a lot of rich opportunity there. For advertisers, they're reaching, it's sort of untapped ad inventory. For the retailer, it's great. It's a revenue diversification play. It's a way to get the products they sell on the shelves, and those relationships with them, it's no longer just a retail and supply relationship. Now it's also a media relationship. So it's a way for them to sort of diversify their relationships as well.
Yeah, and I think even Karim from Broadside was mentioning it's not just endemic advertising of things that are sold inside that store or services offered in that store.
Yeah.
It's also things that are not sold in that store, complementary. You think about you're going to again, you're going to a veterinary clinic, and it could also be for pet insurance, that you want to have, that it's not necessarily sold there, but it's ancillary. Or I think he was talking about a car dealership, and it could be a great place for, bank loans or for insurance carrier.
Yeah. And that's where SMBs come into the picture, because traditionally, if you're talking about something like out-of-home, retail media networks, it's brand advertisers, right? But if you have that sort of contextual, or I should say, complementary opportunity, and I'll use the same example from before, Home Depot, and they've been doing this for a while, but it sort of takes on new forms with retail media, where you now have the opportunity to, like you're buying a bunch of, lumber, right? Do you need a roofer or a contractor, or just, all of those sort of like tying together a product with a local service provider, and the opportunities are rich, particularly in home services.
Oh, absolutely. And you start thinking about it, again, to your point, if you're somebody who's going to Home Depot, well, you probably own your own home, right? And if you're in that repair aspect, it's like, okay, you can start making some context about the age of your home. You can start looking at, again, in a privacy safe way, so contextual based, on that aspect. What zip code are you coming from? What is the age of the homes in those zip codes? I think it may have been Karim again talking about, looking at bulk data of when you purchased a car, right? You're coming up, you're 10 years onto a car, so now it's time to look at that again. So I think there's definite ways of doing that in a privacy safe way that allows for extension of retail media solutions and broader just digital signage in environments that is not just about, manufacturers and consumer packaged goods, which is what traditionally retail media has been around. I remember when I worked in a grocery store, you looked on the back of the register receipt, and you would see the car wash in that shopping center, or the burger place in that shopping center, and I can see this rising up to supporting a lot of those SMBs and those that have physical presence.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's all about those inferences too, and using the data that you do have. And again, people are getting creative once constrained, like necessity is the mother of invention, and in this privacy era you're seeing a lot of like creativity with the data we do have, which is great to see. Now let's move on to the second topic, which is AI. That was of course everywhere. It's everywhere outside of this conference, but also within this conference walls. But a few sort of quick highlights for me. One is that we're about a year into this in terms of the current wave of AI, which was sort of spearheaded by OpenAI and its work around generative and conversational AI. These sort of new flavors of AI that represent this new sort of big wave, we're about a year into it. And one thing that's clear is that this isn't like necessarily a hype cycle in terms of just a lot of sort of hot air and vapor, which we've seen a lot of lately in just various sort of like tech hype cycles. And there are a few reasons for that are becoming evident. One is that this is real, it's concrete. And number two, it's like breadth of applicability. It's being applied everywhere. So even if you look at this small corner of the tech and media world, which is localized advertising and search and all these things, it's applying even within that microcosm in all kinds of ways, both user-facing and then also merchant-facing. Those are one of the cool things that I heard today, which is the way that some of these vendors that serve either SMBs or multi-location brands, how they're using AI to improve the workflows of those small marketers who aren't natural marketers. They're not natural writers. And it's everything from writing copy, assistance with little nudges that are programmatic of tactics or prescriptive tactics for their marketing strategy and what they should be doing. And these are real pain points for your average, whether it be small business or franchisee of a multi-location brand, because they're not natural marketers. They hate writing. So it has all those ingredients of things that are valuable technologies, in that they're solving real tangible pain points. It's broadly applicable, and it's real today, and it's tangible.
Yeah, and I think it's also some of the mundane stuff that candidly has been a challenge for a lot of this stuff. It's not exciting stuff, and I think one of the examples we were looking at, and it could be as trivial as the ad creative of how do I take, we've heard about weather triggering ads for many years, but actually doing that work without having to employ a lot of people to do that. AI can do that. And I think the other example that BrandMuscle was talking about, which I thought was fascinating, was the Bollywood actor that was doing voiceover work essentially for small businesses that resonated with them. And again, this is what you can do with AI tools, really from an ad creative perspective. one of the things that I thought was really interesting, I never really thought about it this way, but moving from a monologue structure to a dialogue structure. I think Christian was talking a lot about that, which is really interesting. Most of marketing today has been monologue, right? I'm pushing information to you. And this is really more about conversations, right? At the end of the day, which is having dialogue, truly dialogue.
Well, to have a customer need be met, usually you need that like sort of consultative sales relationship. Okay, what are you in the market for? How big is your family? You know, all these like sort of probing questions that get to a certain need. Like a search engine has never really been able to fulfill that, but now that we get this like dialogue, it's a two-way, and it's just more than like one, you know, question and then one answer. It's this thing that builds upon itself.
Well, even if you take like this to the nth degree with like local media salespeople, they've never been great about doing needs assessment questions.
True.
And this should be a dialogue with even those customers. Like, what is your capacity? How much can you handle? What's a deal worth to you? You know, those types of things. And you can see where this can actually play into, you know, every aspect of it.
Yeah, and again, that makes it apply to both the sort of user consumer facing and then also the merchant facing aspects of this are what we're starting to see more and more of. Now to your example about the Bollywood actor, for our audience's benefit, this was very cool. BrandMuscle showed an example where this voiceover actor essentially did sort of one spot with the purpose of being with the actor's intent, of course. I know there's a lot of sort of like consternation around like reusing AI versions of actors for things. But anyway, this was the whole point. They built sort of like a template for an ad, and then using AI was able to replicate the actor's voice so that each individual location, I think it was like 2,000 locations in the franchise, could have that original template be applied to like their location, and like they would type in the information of like whatever their store was, and that actor, who's a very famous actor in the region, would basically sort of recite their store. And it was this sort of magic moment for all these SMBs where like, oh, my hero is talking about my store. They knew it was, you know, AI generated, but still it was this very cool thing for them to do. So yeah, that level of like automation, and that speaks to the opportunity with multi-location brands, in that it's not just going to be this like recording an actor's voice, but all that rote work that scales, whether it be like listings management or all that stuff. I think it really hits on a key pain point.
Oh, 100%. And I think when you really, you know, we've had a lot of this stuff in other forms of media where it's usually, you know, kind of the national spot, and then, you know, you can tell where they're inserting that local
it's
franchise.
Tacked on at the end of the car
And this
ad.
is just much more seamless, which is going to create a much better experience. Like at the end of the day, look, it's we've talked about content is king for how many decades it seems. Yeah. This is content, and at the end of the day, it's making the best localized content you can, you know, relative to the platforms that you can do it with.
Exactly. Now, another thing that really sort of was an aha moment for me is when Sarah at BrandMuscle was talking about it, that consumers are sort of developing expectations as they start to use things like ChatGPT. And this reminds me of a sort of typical common sequence of events in like adoption cycles, where you have early adopter brands that will like offer a technology. So with AI now, that's like Microsoft in Bing Chat and Google and others that are starting to offer that. Then it sort of conditions this consumer behavior, and that's sort of the cycle we're in now, or the step we're in now. The step after that is when it goes from acclamation to expectation, right? So when consumers get the taste of that new way of searching, more natural language, more conversational, and then they start to develop that behavior and then expect it, that's the tipping point where, you know, 2008 with the iPhone, where all of a sudden thousands of brands were like behind, and then they had to play years playing catch up. So now's the time to like, you know, get ahead of that before that consumer expectation hits. Any consumer facing app or brand or whatever the case may be needs to start to adopt this stuff, because, you know, we've seen this movie before. If there's like, you know, if they come after the tipping point.
Well, it's also the blocking and tackling is more important now than it's ever been.
Yeah.
You know, some of the unsexy stuff, and we actually talked about this a little bit with MasterCard, with some of the data that they have, and they can tell, like, is a business likely to be open or not?
Absolutely.
That becomes so much more critical when you put this onto AI, because again, to your point, consumer expectations are going to be, like, don't show me something that's not open right now. I want something and I want it. I'm kind of like Willy Wonka. I want it now, right? And if it's not, I mean, sometimes it's that base layer information, like whether it's listings, whether it's about hours of operation, whether it's about the driving directions, all these things that, in some ways we've taken for granted are become, even more important in an AI-driven world.
Yeah. So I'm glad you brought up MasterCard, because there were two sort of aha moments for me today when it came to like sleeping giants in all of this. And one of them is, either MasterCard or MasterCard represents that sort of cohort of massive financial giants once they have all that data, and then they sort of infuse AI to do things like you suggested, where it's sort of predictive analysis. Like, that's going to be massive. And I think MasterCard is sitting pretty in terms of being like a formidable player in the sort of AI revolution, if it can, make those integrations in a smart way. And it sounds like they're already doing that. And the second one is Apple. And it's funny, on Apple's earnings call, I listen to all the earnings call whenever possible. And, a reporter asked Tim Cook a question, like, how come you're not doing anything with AI? And Tim Cook was like, what are you talking about? Like, everything, like, we have so much, we're just not calling it AI like everyone else. It's very Apple just to sort of like, wait and see. But anyway, it's sort of everywhere. But they're a sleeping giant when you look at Apple's consumer touch points with all of the devices we have, and they've had this very privacy first persona, and they're very believable in that respect. So people trust them with their data. So it's all zero party data that you are giving Apple, whether it be like, just wearing your AirPods or your watch, biometrics with your watch, health data, all this sort of just across their hardware spectrum, the ability to be able to play a more sort of predictive, assistant in your life. And it's not going to be Siri. Siri's not up for this job. I think we're coming up against a new era for AI for Apple, because traditionally Siri has been its like throbbing Achilles heel. I mean, it's a joke, and it's just really dragged down the quality of otherwise such elegantly produced products. So either Siri's going to get like a GPT-based brain transplant, or they're going to take it out to the woodshed and start over with something.
So Siri's not it, and Microsoft's Clippy isn't it.
Right.
But to your point, it's the amount of data that these companies are sitting on, and really what you can do with it. And again, when you look at what Apple has done, really from a consumer privacy perspective, first, and being very forward in that, or to your point, really on MasterCard and the amount of data they're sitting on, and obviously they've always had the forefront of privacy as well because of the practice of the business that they're in. It's going to be really interesting to see how these really big platforms that we have not necessarily thought about, juggernauts in AI, are just going to come out of nowhere.
And that's why I think Apple's in just a strong position, not just because it has the data, but going back to the trust issue I mentioned, and the reason why it's been able to maintain that trust is something you just said, which is like, I believe Apple when it says we're not misusing your data, because why would they? They have no financial incentive. They don't need my data to sell me an iPhone. The way that Google needs my data, the way that Amazon needs my data to like, programmatically give me the best content.
And even lesser extent to Microsoft. Microsoft needs it, don't get me wrong, but to a lesser extent, why? Because you're buying software from them.
Oh, absolutely.
That helps your business run.
Exactly.
And even the things that Kelly was talking about, I thought it was really fascinating, like what they're doing with Teams right now, where you can come in. I mean, I don't know how many times you've gotten into a meeting late and you're like, okay, can we stop the meeting, catch me up real quick, what's going on? And what she was talking about, the AI, capturing the notes of what's happening so you can quickly get caught up. Again, time is the most precious commodity people have, and I think AI is being seen as a time saver. It's really Back to the Future. It's really that 1984 or 1985 DeLorean, right? Gives you time.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's a good place to end it. But before we sort of read it out here, Dan, why don't you tell us about the next conference?
So the next conference is coming up in my hometown in Arlington, Texas, home of the Dallas Cowboys for all the Cowboys fans. And that'll be taking place, it'll be at Localogy 24, L24. That'll be taking place April 15th through the 17th in Arlington, Texas. So stay tuned for more updates from Localogy on the event and speakers, and we look forward to seeing you in the spring.
Apparently we're looking at Dak Prescott for a keynoter.
Okay, good. Yeah. I'll see if we can make that happen.
Start making some calls. Okay, that's a good place to end it. Thanks everyone for listening. This has been This Week in Local. Stay tuned every week for more episodes. You can find the show on all major podcast networks and find out more at localogy.com. Please subscribe, like, and comment. Your engagement helps others find us. And if you're interested in being a guest or sponsor, you can email us at podcast@localogy.com. So I'm Mike Boland. Our special guest host today has been Dan Hight. Our producer is Dara Sweat. So thanks for listening and see you next week.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Localogy's This Week in Local with Mike Boland and Charles Loughlin. Be sure to subscribe for more.